Hello, everyone. Welcome to the chat session with Scott Belsky, the Chief Product Officer at Adobe. Scott is an experienced product entrepreneur, an investor, and author. Prior to starting as Chief Product Officer at Adobe, he co-founded Behance and served as a CEO for 6 years and until Adobe acquired Behance. We are super excited to have Scott on board. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Scott, we'll just get started. Could you tell us something about your role and some of the most important elements of design as a CPO at Adobe?
Sure. We're a product company at the end of the day. I think we're all living in an era where technology no longer succeeds because of the technology, but the user's experience of the technology. Our bar as humans for what we expect from the technology we interact with every day, whether it's as a consumer using a product like this, or whether it's as an enterprise customer doing whatever software we're given, we just have high expectations. And ultimately, every decision is basically made in the interface, and designers are the ones who craft these experiences. I just feel like creativity's never been more important in terms of helping people with their work, with their lives, make decisions, take action, feel compelled to act, visually express themselves. And then if I take a step back, and which leads into our conversation, if we think about the future where robots and AI are doing almost everything, what are humans left to do? Absolutely. Other than the uniquely human thing we've got, which is, in my view, creativity. So I do think we're outfitting humanity in some ways for that future.
That's a great segue into this topic. We're all about, AI and, responsible AI these days. Why don't you talk about your view of, AI intersecting with product design and how, Adobe is actually introducing AI-enabled products, whether that's Adobe Sensei, Photoshop Camera, Auto Reframe. How are you making decisions on where AI can be beneficial in your products?
Yeah, there are a few different categories. So I should start by saying we're doing a ton around AI. So Adobe Sensei is our artificial intelligence initiative. That's our brand for it. But it's really it's a effort across all of our products to leverage AI to either elevate the experience, make it more accessible, reduce the energy and time required to do something, or do breakthroughs. And let me just start with, on the mundane, repetitive work side, in the creative industry, I mean, any creative professional you come across who uses digital tools will tell you that his or her day, 50% of it is probably spent doing mundane, repetitive stuff. Yeah. And if these tools became intelligent and knew, what the artist was trying to accomplish, some of that stuff would be done for them. Yeah. And so, it's like, wow. I mean, I don't think there's a single creative professional on earth who'd rather take 3 hours to do something that could be done in 3 minutes. Yeah. And so the AI should support that. And, some great breakthroughs, just to give you 2 examples that are in market now that continue to obviously get better, as they're trained with more usage. One is on masking. So the ability of, when you're masking a person or some sort of animal out of an image, and every little hair, the marching ants that creatives used to spend so much of their day carefully applying to objects. I mean, now it's just incredible how the hair, can automatically be detected from a very, very noisy background. And so that's a key function of compositing, which powers the Photoshop product. And then an example on the video side, which really blew people's minds and was also somewhat controversial, is what we call content-aware fill for After Effects. And so this is the ability to literally select an object in video and then just boom, delete it from every single frame. And the AI obviously knows the shadow to remove, the dust particles on the ground, like boom, that object is not there anymore. It's pretty mind-blowing, but that was always possible. It just took a lot of time.
That's awesome. That sounds very cool. So, I mean, as you incorporate AI into your products, you often talk about the idea of ethics in design and the importance of designers keeping end users. As Adobe builds, more AI-enabled products, how do you translate the idea of ethical design to these products, when they inherently have removed some of the
Yep.
human elements?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a few, major new areas where you have to not just be creative as a technologist about what can go right, you also have to be creative about what can go wrong as you're mapping out the roadmaps and thinking about the implications of AI. Of course, on the trademark and copyright side, there's this question of, wow, if AI is acting upon all of this, past imagery, like with all the GANs research around just totally new forms of creation that, you basically say, I want sky, and then it's a sky brush, and you want a car, and it's a car thing. And it's just like you're throwing stuff out there that are, that are algorithmically generated objects informed by, of course, huge models and tons of training data. So there's that side, and we have to be creative about what can go wrong and how do you foster attribution and how do you make it clear to both the user and to the viewer. I've been really focused lately also on what we're learning from our data sets in terms of what's biased or wrong about them. And I know this is something your team thinks about a lot. And it's sometimes you just throw lots of stuff into a training data set. And you start getting exciting results, but then you don't ever really know what to test. And so in some ways, I think testing has always been a very haphazard part of technology. It's kind of like, okay, program it, someone does QE, and then you launch it. And now it's QE, it's not just people making sure it works. It's actually people being very creative with the wide variety of inputs that need to be tested to determine, bias and whether we feel good about the results.
Yeah, so I think, this is a very important topic these days, right? This is one of the reasons why we started Fiddler. In your opinion, as AI is getting, operationalized, some of the great features that you talked about, what are some of the biggest risks or challenges that you are seeing, in order to deploy AI responsibly, at Adobe or at other places, at other companies that you have been aware of?
Well, I think that, the pipeline of AI in a company is still very ill-defined. You have data scientists and the researchers exploring what sorts of models could be used for what sorts of functions on one side of the world, in a company. And the other side, you have product leaders seeking empathy with customers, trying to solve their problems, and developing new features or iterations of existing features to address those problems. And so the question sometimes that I grapple with is, how do these two processes come together? What's the tech transfer process, and what is unique to AI-driven product transfer or tech transfer? The empathy piece is the part that sometimes gets lost in the process. We just say, oh, wow, this can be done by AI. But empathy is not about getting passionate about a solution. It's about going in and really shoulder to shoulder with customers, understanding what they're trying to accomplish, what their results are, how they work in market, why are they frustrated. I think that part needs work. I like the labs environment for exploring new AI features. It's even more important to invite in a set of power users to, with a degree of forgiveness, try to find and kick the tires on this stuff, which, is important. But I go back to the point about being creative of what can go wrong. And with AI specifically, you really have to think of unique test cases that you never would have imagined to determine the viability of the product.
Absolutely. I think that's spot on. And we also find, AI in general improves things, but those corner cases are the ones where, you need to sort of make sure that it is working properly. So this gets into an interesting point these days. People are talking a lot about, bias in AI. We've seen, lately a lot of, news stories, like, for example, the TikToks, black box AI news story, the Twitter and Zoom sort of image racial bias news stories. What do you think about all of these things, and how do you sort of how are you making sure that, like, for example, at Adobe, you are setting up your products such that they are relatively sort of free of these issues going forward?
Well, one, it shows you the immaturity in the field, and number two is it shows you that it may be, great products, are not just built through science, they're also built through art. And the engineering mentality for AI specifically is like, oh, if I just get enough images, it doesn't matter what kind, or I'm definitely not going to curate them. I'm just going to get tons and tons of images and throw them in, and then the model is just going to keep getting better. Is the assumption that the engineering mind makes. But I think what we've found is that you have to be a bit more purposeful with the art side of curating the data you put into the algorithm. If you know that a population doesn't have an even distribution of race, then should you proactively purchase or commission data sets that bring you up to where you want the algorithm to be performing? An algorithm shouldn't match the circumstantial nature of a population. The algorithm should match. We're builders. Like, it should match what we want to create with our product. And so that purposeful side is interesting to me. And and as I talk to my leaders of various products in the creative world that are exploring the use cases of algorithms, we're thinking very purposefully about what training data we need and what's the breakout of that in terms of the inputs. And then let's be more artists than scientists in doing non-scalable moves like acquiring data sets and being intentional about what we throw in there.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's very important to validate for data sets for potential imbalances and bias. Where does explainable AI fit in this scheme of things? What do so you've been sort of an advisor for Fiddler. What excites you about explainable AI? Where does this fit?
To me, it's a bit like the evolution of unexplainable code. And to the point where people could design with components. People could understand what the building blocks were, and then it was more accessible, and people could make more informed decisions, and people could be more creative as well. And so I think it's a fascinating opportunity to essentially increase the surface area of AI for different disciplines within an organization, and and make sure more people can make sense of all this. I mean, all the questions you're asking rely on the fact that people can even understand it, right?
Yep.
That to me is one of the most exciting parts of AI as a discipline, right? Is making people understand what actually is happening and why, and that informs part of that art as opposed to the science side that we were talking about earlier.
So as a product person, I imagine that you often get these questions, why is it working? How is your AI products are doing? How does this process work today? When you have these questions, for example, where do you see gaps in the AI technology so that, you as a product person can get like this answers to build that artistic intuition of what is the right thing, to build for the user?
The short answer for me is customers, right? I mean, if customers for my products, if customers are delighted with the result, either in the form of what it looks like or in how much less time it took to achieve it, that's a win. So that's easily measurable, but it's also somewhat confining in terms of what the potential of AI can be.
Yeah.
One of the challenges, that I think we're always trying to discuss as a team building creative products is how do we think beyond the scope of just reducing time?
Yeah.
Doing this automatically for you that you used to do manually.
Yeah.
How do we really take a step back and rethink? Well, for example, Lightroom is a massive audience of people who care about photography, who are organizing their images and care deeply about every image and what it looks like and how it's organized. But even the nature of organization in and of itself, should that even exist, in an AI future? Should you ever have to drag things into albums? Should you ever have to tag things ever again? And should you even have to think about what you want to tag things with? Or should that all just be done for you? And if that's the case, how does it actually change the entire org model of the product itself? one of the holy grails, I believe, of building products for creative people is the fact that the blank page, is very intimidating. And it's what makes it so hard to be a creative professional. You have to learn, it's a huge learning curve to know how to start from a blank page and make something great. There's this new generation of content first creators that are coming into the market. What are they starting with? They're starting with content. What derives that content? Potentially AI. So I think there's just some big unlocks that that we've yet to fully crack, but are focused on.
Do you see, like, for example, when these creators are interacting with these AI-based features in Adobe, like, do they want to get, for example, feedback around, why the AI is making certain decisions so that they can intuitively understand? So, for example, you mentioned, removing certain things behind the scene, like the background of the image or all on the throughout the video or things like that. Are you seeing, customers asking for, why is it doing the way it is, having this embedded, explanations in quote unquote in these AI based product features that you're building?
I think it's a good question. I think we're not seeing so much yet, and it's only because of where we are in the adoption curve and where we are in terms of also the nature of the technology. But one thing I know for sure is that we have two types of customers that use creative tools. There's one side that are seeking the light and accessible tools, and they're very outcome driven. They only care about getting a great outcome. Those folks will love AI-based creative tools, and they probably won't care about how they got there. But then, the core of our business is the rich and deep creatives that actually care as much about the process of achieving the outcome as they do about the outcome. They would not be happy with what I just described. They want the sliders and the details, and they want to manipulate every single layer. And for those people, they are going to care deeply about what AI did for them and what the outputs were and why. They will want all of those decisions explained to them, and they'll want the ability to manipulate it. Because they're not just trying to turn day into night in a photograph using an algorithm. They want it to be a certain type of night, and they want the light to be a little bit differently. And so I think there is an opportunity there to unbundle to some extent the factors influencing the outcome.
Yep. And this is probably also where they also care about potential testing different inputs and seeing if there is if the AI is consistently behaving across these inputs. Very cool. 100%. Very cool. Awesome. So as this field is going forward, we are seeing new innovations come in every almost every week. We are seeing some exciting announcement coming from one of the AI companies out there. So as you look at the future of design, where do you see the next frontier of innovation using AI? What are they, where are they most needed?
A few things come to mind. One is the kind of, aside from the, saving a step function amount of time in processes and entirely new models of creation. A few other things, like for example, 3D and immersive as a field. Is really exciting. It's a new medium I believe we're all going to be living in. I think someday our kids will say, our grandkids maybe will say, you had screens? Like, what are screens? Why would you have a physical, it's like record players. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And if we're living in this augmented reality immersive world, everyone's going to need to create for it, but they're not all going to want to learn CAD, and sort of the math associated with creating three-dimensional objects and experiences. AI can help with this. We know any 2D object, we have algorithms that can tell us what the likely 3D experience of that object is and what the interactions might be by default. I think the defaults of the augmented reality world we're living in will be algorithmically determined, and AI is going to play a huge role there. I think that this elusive, design to code concept, bringing together in the product design space, designers and all the underlying code for an experience, like a lot of that can be solved with AI as well. And you just wonder if the engineers are able to spend more time on being creative with the interactions and the animations and everything else, because a lot of the underlying experience code is done for them, completely automatically. Through understanding the designer's intention with the product.
what does it take for AI to work, in a real world? Today, like there are these, obviously there's this long vision of as AI is going to, vastly improve all of the products and experiences, as you mentioned, for various different things that we are engaging in real life. But there are certain roadblocks, right? I mean, this is like it's a journey that AI is taking. What do you think are some of the things that you see in the next few years to really solve that we need to solve for AI to like to take that shape and really impact the real world?
Well, one thing is one key thing, which I know you're focused on with your team primarily, is making sure there's more stakeholders of this new field. This can't be limited to really smart researchers and data scientists. This is a field that needs to essentially become a tool set for anyone creating any sort of experience, designing anything. I think that's one big big kind of exciting obstacle to overcome in some ways. I also think that the ethics piece. I mean, we need to really understand not only like what data can we use and can we not use collectively, in the world, social networks, like everything else going on there, but also, how do we measure and validate the outcomes, make sure that we're proud of them? How do we determine what we can trust and can't trust? I mean, I think is another major thing as these technologies become more powerful. We're going to see a lot of media that was manipulated, and it's important to understand and learn. Humans need to actually develop their brains to some extent as well to know what we can and can't trust. I think that's another factor as well. But listen, I tend to be an optimist. I believe that every time throughout humanity where we feel like a new technology is going to ruin everything, we somehow are able to adapt to some degree, or we pretty much always adapt. I mean, this one is particularly interesting because can artificial intelligence outpace our own intelligence? I think collectively we believe that is possible. And so how do we put in the guardrails, and how do we evolve, to benefit from it, make it work for us as opposed to us working for it?
Absolutely. That's a great way to end it. Thank you, Scott, for being on our summit, and spending your time. We are absolutely thrilled for having you to speak about the future of AI, as well as how you are building responsible AI products at Adobe. And thank you for the time.
Thank you for having me, and anything for Team Fiddler. So
awesome. Thank you.
Good luck. Talk to you soon.